Sahana vavatu, Sahanao bhunaktu, Sahaviryang karavavahe, Tejasvina vadhitamastu, Ma vidvishavahe. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Triguna Vibhaga Yogaha. And we have commenced chapter 14 last week. So these three gunas are a model. So you're thinking, how does this information help us? Think of it as a model. In fact, Vedanta has many models where we can use them for purposes of understanding the external world in reference to the body. In fact, the body is not apart from the external, but in reference to the body, the external world, but also the internal world that is in our bodies and in our minds. And Vedanta has powerful methods to do so because it has undergone rigorous analysis through multiple centuries, and also it's been attacked from different angles. So you can imagine taking your field out into the field, and you get to have debates with competing models. Now that really forces you to step up your game, right? It forces you to think extra hard. Where's the loopholes in your method? So Vedanta has undergone this debating system for the last some centuries, and this was the culture back then. This was the very intellectual culture in India. So we had intellectual walking all over the place, trying to discover and learn from each other. And this is the beauty of this culture, why it's so sophisticated and so complete. Do we ever find ourselves feeling blurry minded? You know, that feeling of blurry mindedness, things just go over your head. Like, it's supposed to be clear. You know yourself to be quite smart, but in some particular moment, it just whoosh, goes right over your head. Like literally someone says something, it's like, I'm not concretely capturing this. And in that moment, you just feel fuzzy minded. There's a sense of deflation, you know, when we're inflated, like full of zest, vitality. And there's those times when we deflated and it's almost like we're on the verge of death, but we're still alive. So we feel tired, we feel fatigued, we feel unmotivated, we feel confused, we feel veiled. Things are going over our head. We're not able to capture something. And it may happen at a specific time of the day. May not be all the time. This is one potential. Another potential is whereby we feel a little bit different. There's energy behind it, but it's unfocused energy. It is distracted energy, disturbed energy, frustrated energy. There is a sense of scatteredness in our minds, stress, anxiety. There is unfocused thoughts, right? Things are moving too fast in our minds. We're unable to hold any one thought for some satisfactory length of time. Thus, we're not able to look into it and enjoy it. Happiness comes, already it's gone, because happiness is just a thought. That's another potential. We can all relate to this. Another is those very rare times. Unfortunately, it's the rarest of all, and it's the one that we want the most. We feel creative. Original ideas are coming in. We don't have to borrow other people's stuff. It's just flowing in. In fact, entertainers, sculptors, artists, programmers, musicians, even rap. I actually like rap, not the modern rap whereby you just basically flood all of the problems in vulgar words, but a rap whereby it is it's taking something around and it's improvising on the basis of what is around you and creating a really interesting thread to follow. It requires a lot of creativity, a lot of lucidity, a lot of originality. And we feel self-inspired, right? Our state of mind is one that we really want to be with, but it doesn't last. It lasts for some time. We're focused. Our mind is still. Not the kind of fatigued still, but just actively engaged still. It's able to go into action mode when it needs to, but it's also able to relax. We can all relate to these different periods that we all undergo. We wake up and we feel bubbly, right? Especially in the morning. That is the sattvic time when we wake up. And we feel cheerful, and we just feel clear-headed. You know, that feeling of clear-headedness? It's like, wow, things are just really, I wish this could be extended. As the day goes on, especially in afternoon, that's when the rajas is at full throttle, then that initial clarity just subsides. But what does come in is some agitation, some disturbance, some difficulty to sustain a happy thought. It is more of a workaholic mode, more of a getting to work mode, more of a let's do something mode. It's not particularly focused or creative. It's just let's do anything. Let's go out. Let's go to a park. Let's play. We can also relate to that. So the question is, what accounts, when all is said and done, when you go beyond biology and chemistry and psychology and all forms of arts that we as human beings have discovered through our analysis into experience of human psychology, when all is said and done, what is it that accounts to all of this? And as we said, we began the discussion last week. It is the mixtures and combinations and permutations of the three gunas. And these three gunas is what the nature of prakriti is, which we have discussed or began discussing last week. In fact, it is true that all our lives, right, putting this knowledge aside just for now, the self, all our lives, we're doing nothing but guna management, right? We're trying to move away from those dull moments, from moments of not being original, from being disturbed into being more cheerful. And yes, we're also trying to extend that. Now, the question is, of course, is it really possible? Since we do not have control over this prakriti, can we really, right? How much control do we really have to modify these three gunas? We do have a little bit of control, but we don't have as much control as we would like. So it's not really about, let's find methods to change the three gunas. Because even if you succeed, your entire samskara, your entire causal body is still making you be the way that you are. Try as you wish. Try all of the self-help techniques. When you stop, what happens? We revert back to our default. What is that default? Our samskaras that make us the individual that we are every single day. And these samskaras are governed by these three gunas. And these three gunas are the prakriti. And you and I don't have control over prakriti. We only have some control in reference to the intellect, because obviously a samskara can tell us, okay, here's how to act in reference to someone has just come up to you. Now, how do you respond to that person? Are you friendly? Are you defensive? So that nature of how you respond to someone, there's going to be a samskara because you've done it before. That is an impression. But however, you do have a little bit of control. You can say, well, let me, I feel a little bit cheerful. I've heard some documentary, you need to be a little friendly towards people. And that memory comes into that moment. And that gets added into an intellect. And the intellect says, okay, on the basis of what I've heard on that short-term inspiration, let me change my method of my response. Let me not be so defensive. So there is a small level of control, but not total level of control. What a jnani, a liberated person, is also under the influence of these three gunas, like anyone else. But what's the only difference? They accept them. Okay, it's coming. This is the three gunas. I have zero control over them. Now, what we really want to hear is, oh, let's control them, right? Let's just extend that happy state throughout our lives. We know it doesn't work. You already know that. You've tried it already, right? Now, if we're young, then maybe we're still kind of saying, no, there's methods out there. But in reality, no, there's not. There's not one method out there that can make you happy for extended amount of time. So it's not really about changing, but it's really about accepting what is. It's rather being objective in reference to the combinations that these gunas are constantly helping us or sometimes hindering us from achieving or enjoying our life. We also stated that the structure, and by the way, where did this Three Guna model come from? They were first mentioned in the Sankhya philosophy. Now, Sankhya philosophy is very close to Vedanta, actually. They've done a lot of contribution in terms of their analysis and inference into reality. Because what do we discover and what do we reveal about reality? Reality is one big knowledge in form of manifestations, right? So Satmaguna, all knowledge. That knowledge manifests as infinite names and forms. So knowledge is already there. It's not like we create knowledge. We only discover knowledge. Now, in reference to observing the world, we get to pick out certain workings, certain mechanics of how the world works. And thus we create the Three Guna model. For example, the weather, right? Still and shiny, right? Still, Sattva Guna. But then again, you've got that shiny, bright intellect and still mind, Sattva Guna. You've got windy, strong, loud weather. But then again, you also got windy, strong, loud thoughts. And then you got Melbourne. You got Melbourne weather, right? Dark. And then again, we've got that same kind of, and it's hard to sometimes be happy in that kind of mode, right? So not only does the environment contribute, so does your family, because your family can also be doing a lot of noise-making activities that also adds onto the Rajaguna. But then also, how do you respond to that noise-making activity in the house? There is a samskara, which is also governed by the Three Gunas. And then your final experience is generated in your subtle body, and then you have a natural reaction through your 5 organs. Maybe you say something, or maybe you give him a little spank or something. Okay, now we have also spoken that we're going to divide this section into 5 parts. Verse 5, which I'm going to get into now, is really just a definition of the gunas. Verse 6 to 9 is how these gunas bind us. Verse 10 to 13 is what is the indication that these gunas are active in our minds right now. Verse 14 to 15 is how do these guna affect the afterlife. Verse 16 to 18 will tell us what is the effects of these gunas while living. Going back into verse 5, I'm going to read the verse and I'm going to explain it. Sattva, Raja, Tamaguna, nature that makes up Prakriti, is responsible for the association, bondage between Atma and Anatma. I hope I have given you this verse. Okay. And number 2, so this is in reference to the individual. And now in reference to the big picture. The different mixtures creates infinite varieties of names forms like RGB. Now let me explain. Let me start with the macrocosm. I'll go into the microcosm. We always start from the big picture when we want to describe reality. We can also go from the bottom up. That means from the gross to the subtle. But in this case, we're going to go from the subtlest into the most gross. Obviously, the gross will be the body. So in the Panchadashi chapter 1, there's a general model of how the densification of consciousness takes place. And I'll just give you a general overview now, and then I'll go into, so right now I'm doing number 2 of verse 5, which is different mixtures creates names and forms. Okay. So in the Panchadashi, it says that there's only one non-dual reality. Before all of this, there's only one Advaitam Satchit Ananda. And within that consciousness, you can say within, there is a power. There's a power of what we call Maya or Prakriti. There are 2 synonymous words. Now, Maya or Prakriti is generally Sattva Guna dominant because it is all knowledge. That means the potential is Sattva Guna dominant. That means the Rajas and Tamas, called the twins, the 2 terrible twins that cause all of the problems in our lives, they are at their minimum level. But what is at maximum level is Sattva Guna. Now, what happens is there's a disturbance. And this disturbance is whereby the growth of these Sattva, these 2 twins, they start to come into the mix of the Sattva Guna. So there is originally Sattva Guna, and then these 2 start to come in and they start to grow in intensity. everything is still. Just imagine that. All is still. And suddenly, out of nothing, the whole universe projects. Now, just to give you some indication how to visualize that, imagine snow is falling on the roof, right? And more of it falls. Everything's quiet. Eventually, the roof can no longer give way. And suddenly, in one moment, it just falls. In other words, something was already brewing in the background. We just didn't hear it. We didn't know about it. But then eventually it gives way when its weight is no longer balanced. It goes out of balance. And then he further says, once the contamination takes place of this guna, Satmaguna, by these two twins, then we have the next process, which is the Tan Matras. The Tan Matras is the 5 subtle elements. Now think of the 5 subtle elements like, for example, in potential. So just to give you an example, imagine 1 hour from now, right? Or after 2 hours from now, probably during this class, 2 hours from now, you're having a normal time. And suddenly out of nowhere, an unpleasant thought comes, right? Some sad thought, depressing thought, it could be a cheerful thought. It doesn't really matter. Where is that thought now? You don't know, right? We can talk about it, but it's like, what are you talking about? But in 2 hours from now, it's going to come. In other words, that thought or that potential is already there. That's why you're going to experience it in 2 hours, not yet. The Tan Matras, the 5 subtle elements, they go through a process called the Pancha. Pancha already explained, whereby the 5 subtle elements combine into different combinations and they create the 5 gross elements. So how do I understand that? Just like that thought that is going to come 2 hours from now, right? It is now in potential. But right before it comes, how does it come? Before you open your mouth and respond to it, how does it come? It comes as a thought. Now, whether we capture that thought or not, it doesn't matter. Usually we don't capture that thought because it is so closely linked to the space between the thought and by the time we open our mouth, there is just such a small space we don't even capture that thought. But there is that first the samskara, and then the thought, and then we mention something. Just like that. First, the subtle elements in potential, followed by the Pancha Mahabhuta, the 5 gross elements, and then immediately when those 5 gross elements come, what happens then? The whole jagat of time, space, and objects arises. Now, this is a general model that is described in Panchadashi, chapter 1. Now, for consciousness to know itself, for me to know myself as consciousness, what do we need? We need the 5 organs of perception. That is, see how they're yellow? So they're made out of Sattva Guna. In other words, they're the pure. In other words, they have to be the subtlest. Why do they have to be the subtlest? Because that which is subtle has to precede that which is gross. In order to observe the gross world, you need a subtler form of the gross world, in the subtler matter of the grosser matter. And thus, the first origin that takes place once these Pancha Mahabhutas come, the 5 gross elements, is these 5 organs of perception. In other words, they're still now being built as we're going through a creation process. So to give you an order, consciousness, Maya, 5 subtle elements, 5 gross elements, 5 organs of perception. Now, in order for consciousness to know itself in matter, you also want to know yourself in matter, to observe your infinite potential, you need 5 organs of perception. Is that enough? No. That 5 organs of perception, that data, which is capable of receiving, of picking up the 5 gross elements, which is what makes up matter, atoms, particles, everything is these 5 organs, these 5 gross elements. It needs to send that information into the mind. As I said before, the mind is that which assimilates the data into one place. Now, the mind is also that which doubts. Imagine you see a person, right? And they kind of look suspicious and they're walking towards you. And you're doubtful how to respond. That moment while you're going from like a little pendulum, should I run or should I just turn a different direction, or should I pretend like I'm not afraid? Should I run or should I pretend like I'm not afraid? Whatever your doubt is, that is when the mind is still in that pendulum mode. Now, how do you stop that pendulum mode? How do you stop that doubt? You need to then consult, you need to dial the intellect. The mind calls the number of the intellect and says, hey, I need to stop doubting. I need to make up my mind. What do I do? Do I turn the direction or do I go up to them? And then the intellect responds and says, aha, you need to do the following. Now, my question to you is, where does the intellect get its data from? Who does the intellect consult? Because intellect is also inert. This whole thing underneath the line is just all inert. Where is the intellect going to get its data from? It consults the samskaras. Now, what are your samskaras? Samskaras is that which you have done already before. In other words, if you have already if you already responded in a certain way on the basis of someone being suspicious, you're going to respond likely the same. In other words, the intellect now calls a samskara hotline. Samskara hotline says, yep, last time you turned the other direction just for your own safety, do the same again. Now the intellect goes, aha, that is a potential. However, they're not carrying a weapon like last time. They're not carrying like a little bulge in your pocket or anything. Now, where does the intellect get that data from? It gets it from the memory, the chitta. So in other words, now the intellect takes the chitta and it says, aha, so on the basis of what some samskaras have told me, and on the basis of the memory contradicting of what the samskara has told me, it is safe to actually approach this person. Now the intellect has to then send that into the final product, into the final mouth, into the final legs in the form of action, in the form of words. So now this intellect has to consult the ego. Now the ego says, the ahamkara is just that which takes possession of that experience, of that entire assessment. And he says, okay, so we have decided to make a certain decision. And then he again consults the mind. He says, how do I feel about that? Do I feel afraid? Do I feel empowered? And then the mind says, well, you feel in a certain way, feel like, like you're confident. Now, where is it going to get that data from? Intellect, because the intellect has to make the mind stop doubting, since the ego received the data that it's safe to approach the person. So what I'm showing you is it is a constant cycle. Finally, to get out of this loop, the ego then sends the data into the 5 organs of action, Raja Guna, that's why they are red, Raja Guna, which is that which always does action. And then finally, it then sends out the words, sends out the action, sends out whatever it is back into the world. Now, the question is, all of this was macrocosm. I just give you a quick highlight of the process of creation. Let's go into the individual. What is the individual? Because we have to turn this into Guna mode teaching, right? The individual, the jiva, has an experience. And what kind of an experience is it? Every human experience consists of 2 realities. One, it is the original consciousness, and 2, there we can call we can also call the ahamkara. This is just a different model. We can say the body, mind, intellect. We can say the ahamkara. We can say the antakarana. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to say it's called the ahamkara. So every single person's experience consists of these 2 realities: original consciousness and the lower self, the higher self and the lower self. Now, what is the lower self made of? The lower self is made of the body, mind, intellect. We also call the body, mind, intellect the reflecting medium. Why is it called the reflecting medium? Because it is that which reflects original consciousness. Now, people usually turn this reflected consciousness, reflected teaching into this one big thing. I'll just explain it now in very simple terms. The second is reflected consciousness, because that which is shining upon it, which is nothing but the original consciousness, that is called reflected consciousness. So the question is, what is reflected consciousness? Reflected consciousness, Chidabhasa or Pratibimba Chaitanya, is when original consciousness mixes with the body, mind, intellect, then that mixture, that person's awareness, that person's consciousness, that is called reflected consciousness or Chidabhasa or Pratibimba. Now, this reflected consciousness is, where is it known? It is known in the intellect. So the question now is, what happens if this intellect is mala? What happens if it's contaminated with Tamaguna? What happens if it's contaminated with Rajaguna? Then it can only act in reference to what these 3 gunas are causing it to experience at any one moment. Now, I already said early on that this intellect is nothing but a receiver of these vasanas or these samskaras. So The whole point of this Guna teaching is to look at your subtle body, look at your mind in one short summary. The mind is either going to be sattvic, it's either going to be rajasic, or it's either going to be tamasic, or not just one, but it's going to be a mixture. The whole point of the Guna teaching is to increase the Sattva Guna and reduce these two twins, which are causing us to not feel well, to feel lazy, to feel lethargic, to feel like we're not capturing what needs to be captured. Okay, now the question is, let me give you an example of the reflected teaching. Imagine buckets, and there's 5 buckets, and the outside shell is called the physical body. We can call that the physical body, the gross body. The inside water can be called the subtle body, which consists of your mind, intellect, and ahamkara. Now, suppose the sun is shining on all 5 buckets, and one of those buckets, the water is dirty, and then the other bucket is water is clean. Obviously, the clean water is going to be reflecting more of that sunlight than the dirty water. So the whole Guna teaching is just to purify that water, purify that mind, so that the original consciousness may be firmly, clearly, with total lucidity known as I, as myself. The second point of the teaching is to reduce these 2 gunas, which are causing all of the problems in our life, all of the projection. This is a guna of projection, and this is the guna of excessive sleep. So if you know someone that sleeps all day, or too much, or doesn't want to wake up, they want to sleep 2 more hours in that cozy little warm place, Tamaguna is dominant. Okay. Let's talk about Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, just some general qualities to introduce you. Sattva Guna is the energy that makes your mind focus inwards. So whenever you're thinking about your own life or your own thoughts, or you're introspecting or you're reflecting what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, when it needs to be done, could have you done better, and is there a better way to do it? All of those thoughts that are pertinent and related to your own subjective experience, that is when Sattva Guna is dominant at that particular time. It is also a time when you're experiencing connection with yourself, connection with your family, connection with the society, connection with God. If you don't experience that connection, what's lacking? Sattva Guna. Because these 2 gunas, you're not going to feel that in Raja Guna. It is an energy of let's do something. I don't have time to focus on love. I don't have time to experience God or love. So Sattva Guna is the whereby we feel that connection, or we're practicing those 20 values in chapter 13. That's why they're important. Another quality of Sattva Guna is knowledge, because we said on the macrocosmic, Sattva Guna is the blueprint of the entire creation. So everything in creation is knowledge belonging to this single guna. Now, what is conducive for knowledge in reference to the individual? Can you be by a train station? 5 minutes, every 5 minutes a train is passing, noise, right? No. In other words, you can now start to see how Sattva Guna, if your mind is Sattva Guna oriented, how it's going to bind you. If someone makes a noise, you lose it, right? If someone starts to disturb you, problems. In other words, Sattva Guna being knowledge, what is the then person going to identify with? Or what are they going to value? Silence, tranquility. Whereas the jnani, despite them loving knowledge, in fact, all of them are knowledge junkies, knowledge lovers, they don't depend on silence because they know it's just the world. The world is made of these 3 gunas and I don't have any control over them. We'll get into this later. Now, what's the risk of Sattva Guna if it's dominant? Academic knowledge. Even Vedanta can be turned into academic knowledge. Oh, I want to read every word in that Dayananda's home study course. Let me read every single Sanskrit word. I want to know it all. That is Sattva Guna being bound by it. What are you trying to accomplish? You just try to recognize clearly what is this reality and what is this reality. How am I this and how am I not that? That is all, because you don't have control over this. Zero. As we said before, yes, you do have a little bit of control in reference to intellect, but this has been going on for eons. Before you as a person came into this world, this has been going on. After you're gone, as a person, this is still going to be going on. We don't create this. Our only job is to say, all I need to recognize is I am awareness in whose presence the activity of these three gunas are constantly coming and going, and thus not get identified with this endless ongoing activity. You will never understand this completely. We will never understand the universe completely, because an individual is a minuscule dot in the vast universe of knowledge that we are yet to discover. Because these three gunas are infinite in knowledge, infinite in nature. There are civilizations in the 14 lokas that are now trillions of years ahead of us on Earth. And here we are on Earth going, let us develop the new TikTok, the one that is going to, induce these rajas and tamaguna and so on. Social media. Oh my goodness. Rajaguna and tamaguna. You know why? Because as you scroll through social media, what is that? It's made to keep on making those listings. In other words, it doesn't allow me to stop. In other words, social media is just reinforcing the monkey mind. I want to keep going. Give me something new. Give me something more. This reveals to us what kind of a state the world is going in, because we just simply respond on the basis of what these gunas are showing us in this world, and we create a market for that. Okay. So when the Sattva guna is dominant, then what's mostly active is your 5 sense organs. In other words, they will, your eyes are going to be open. You're going to be listening. You're going to be like, okay, one more session. I need more knowledge, right? You're going to be a lover of knowledge. Can you relate to that? Yeah. Now, what you want to do is you want to be a lover of knowledge, right? Because that is the only choice. However, we have to talk later not to get attached to that, because there's a difference between loving knowledge and depending upon knowledge for your happiness. That is when you're under the spell of Maya. Then we have the Rajaguna. Rajaguna is whereby the mind is focused outwards. For example, you go to a boot camp. There's always 2 types of people, or maybe there's more in between. Ones that are finding an opportunity to talk in every moment. Right? They always want to socialize. Oh, there's someone there, let's talk. Can't help it, right? And it's fun. The others, they just sit on a bench by themselves, right? They're okay by themselves. They want to go into the room and study. They want to look at the notes they heard in class. That is guna dominance. One is rajas more, one is sattva more. Now, it doesn't mean that there is absolute rajas, absolute sattva. Everyone's a combination. It changes according to the people that you hang around, the environment, according to where you're at, what's going on around you. Also, what is samsara for a Rajaguna dominant intellect? Not knowledge. See, suppose you have a partner and your partner is Rajaguna dominant, right? And you're Satmaguna dominant. This is a very interesting relationship. What's going to happen? They're going to go, why do you keep on studying? You can just relax. Let's go out. And you're like, you don't understand. I love knowledge. This is my thing, right? But they want to go out. They're not so much into knowledge. They're more into action. In other words, Rajaguna dominance equals let's do something. Let me act. Because as I said last week, Rajaguna is that energy that puts things together on a macrocosmic. In reference to the individual, what do you want to do? You always want to put things together. Let's put together an experience. And let's experience that, obviously, in the subtle body. And workaholics, right? Overtime, let's stay over. It's like, why are you working out? Why don't you come home? Well, and they're making it. Now, what happens is the intellect is going to now justify and say, well, I just want to, we need more income. But the question is that really the case? Or is that more of a workaholic attitude owing to a Rajaguna dominant mind? And then we have the karma indriyani, which is obviously the 5 organs of action. They're always going to be involved, right? The hands are going to be involved, moving. It's going to be kind of like active, dynamic person. They're going to be chit chat all over the place. They hardly stop talking. During silence, now suppose again, the partnership, the Satmaguna is looking for a silent time every moment, right? But a Rajaguna dominant person, what are they going to say? Silence, excellent. Let's fill this with entertainment. Let's fill this with games. Let's fill this with life. So again, the personality is going to be determined by the dominance of these 3 gunas. And then we got Tamaguna. Tamaguna is whereby neither the jnana indriyanis nor the karma indriyanis are going to be active. They're going to be mostly inactive, because Tamaguna, as I said in reference to macrocosm, is the veiling, concealing power, avarana shakti. When a person is dominated by that avarana shakti, what does that cause? The buddhi is covered. In other words, my discerning ability goes. I cannot calculate what needs to happen next. In fact, we got in India, we got those 4 systems. We got the Vaishya, we got the Kshatriya, we got the Brahmana, and we got the Shudra. What is that? Shudra, mostly, we call them the worker bees. That's another name to describe it. Those workers, right? They just give me something to do. We got the worker bees in a society. I don't want to think, just give me something, and I'm not going to think further than what I've been told. So even an employee, you can tell instantly what capacity of these 3 gunas they are, right? And then you go, okay, I should have not prescribed this job to them because they made a mess. Why? Because they were Tamaguna dominant. They couldn't think more. They couldn't think more creatively than you have assigned to them to do. Therefore, they just want, okay, go there, do this, and then do the next. That's all I want to know. In other words, my buddhi is covered as a Tamaguna dominant buddhi personality. And it also causes, as I said earlier, prolonged sleep. So it feels also, it's got its unique bliss about it, doesn't it? When we wake up and we go, okay, let me maximize it, like every minute that I can in this state whereby even if I have the scriptures next to me, bedside table, or whatever your field of expertise is, and you really love it during the day, that thing suddenly becomes irrelevant, doesn't it? You don't think about that stuff when you wake up or when you're in that slumber state of darkness. And by the way, mentioning darkness, this is why we would talk about death. This is why death is not darkness, because darkness is Tamaguna. Darkness is deep sleep, but awareness is beyond the 3 gunas. We have beautiful verse in 245. In fact, Rani and Bina will know, where Krishna says, Vishaya Trigunya Vedaha. How does it go? Trigunya Vishaya Vedaha, Nistragunyo Bhavarjuna, Nirdvandvo Nitya Sattvastaha, Niryoga Kshema Atmavan. In other words, Bhavarjuna, be without the 3 gunas, be without these 3 gunas. Be without the opposites. What is the opposites? Nirdvandvaha, Nitya Sattvastaha. In other words, be without these 3 gunas. Be permanently Nitya Sattvastaha, permanently established in purity. In other words, be beyond the 3 gunas, but also be established in purity. In other words, Satmaguna. This is what Krishna is saying to Arjuna in chapter 2, verse 45. Atmavan, last line. In other words, know the self. Be established in Satmaguna, but also know the self. Okay. So also Tamaguna is whereby we forget. Okay. So suppose that, we're Tamaguna dominant and then we want to present something and we suddenly forget, oh my God, it's just gone out of my reach. It's nowhere to be found. In other words, it causes negligence. Suppose you have a report at work, or suppose you give a presentation or you say something and you make a mistake and you don't even notice it. Happens all the time to every single one of us. What is that? Tamaguna just came in. So the more we cultivate and nourish our minds into Sattva Guna, the more we recognize these brilliant, lovely traits that we see in entertainers, that we see in just these incredible, creative people that are just in the flow. Now, the reality is you may not succeed, right? As I said before, this is not really about trying to feel good, because that's a samsari, trying to feel good. It is trying to understand when these 3 gunas are acting right now and go, aha, so here is Sattva Guna. Let's appreciate it while it's there. Here's Tamaguna. I made a mistake. Tamaguna is there. Okay, so what? I'm aware of it. All I need to do is recognize it. Be aware of it, because awareness is always free of that. Not to necessarily try to understand the entire gamut of how these gunas work, because as I said, what's the point? The whole system is governed by Prakriti. It's got nothing to do with your awareness. The only thing, end of the day, that you as an individual have to ascertain is, as chapter 2, verse 45 said, be established in purity. Atmavan, know the self. That is it.
More of Sattva Guna than the other 2. But isn't the universe balanced by all 3 gunas? And also, like take human beings, for example, we've got the 3 gunas, like we have the workers, we have the intellect people, we have the, the
administrators.
isn't that balancing the earth? Like, if one of us eradicated, then really who's going to feed us and who's going to work and toil the land? And
Yeah, beautiful.
so,
Beautiful.
I don't understand that part. It needs a balancing.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a really good point I was going to get into. And okay, let's mention it now. So see, what I described now was how these gunas express. No one's completely this or this or that. That is one point. The second point is you can't now say, oh, okay, so, what about society? Well, we're talking about you as an individual who has come to this journey of Vedanta. But now let's go into society mode. Yes, the whole system is set up so that we do have the Shudras, we do have the worker bees, we do have the Kshatriyas, we do have the Vaishyas, the entrepreneurs, the investors, the stock traders, the traders on the street. We do have the Kshatriyas, the protectors of the environment, the politicians that set the rules, the police force that protects the all four. And we do have the sannyasas, we do have the brahmanas who are there to study, to create rules, to research what is the most effective way for the society to go about its ways in reference to the modern times. So all these four are beautifully set up by this vast intelligence that we call Ishvara. So now it's not like, oh, okay, so, these two are the enemies. They're only, if you want to call them enemies, they're only, when it comes to a spiritual search, to a spiritual journey, in fact, we're not searching, but when it comes to living a full, clear, devoted, loving, beautiful, connected life, knowing one's interconnectedness with everything, with all that is when these two gunas have to be managed. So this chapter 14, Triguna Vibhaga Yogaha, is nothing but managing these three gunas where we're increasing sattva and reducing these two. But again, on a societal level, absolutely, there is an absolute balance. And as I said, you don't control that balance. That is already there. This four model that in the quote, the caste system, that was already, and that's not just in India, by the way, this is all throughout the world. If you just look into any country, you will see there is the class that just wants to be told what to do. There is the entrepreneurs, the money makers. If they're not there, economic crisis, we need them. If the worker bees are not there, who's going to build, who's going to repair your stuff? Who's going to build houses? Who's going to put buildings together? Who's going to make your roads smooth so that you don't, swirl over and die? And then we've got the protectors. If the police force is not there, how can you feel safe from those who have an agenda for themselves? If the politicians are not there, who's going to run the country? It's easy to criticize a politician, right? Oh, he's this, she's that. But you try running the entire country, hard. We do have those brahmanas who behind the scenes, the least known, who set the rules. And all of these four come together, create this system that we call Bhuloka, the earth. Now we've got other lokas, of course, but the whole system is really just one beautiful setup that is operated by this vast intelligence on the basis of these three gunas. For example, you got the Satmaguna. There is a blueprint, but so what? You need the material for the creation to take place, right? You need matter, but that is not good enough. How are you going to convert matter into some intelligent constructive form, into a tree, into a bird, into a sparrow, into a fish, into a salmon? There's many fishes. How are you going to, all of that knowledge belongs to Satmaguna, and you got the material. It doesn't matter. You still need a Rajaguna. You need the putting together power of the Satmaguna and Tamaguna so that you have a fish. And then we can, enjoy that fish through our 5 organs of perception. And then we can have an experience about the fish. Some of us have some skaras to eat. Some of us have some skaras to take photographs. In other words, the whole system is set up and it's working without any participation on our part. In fact, these 5 organs of action, of perception, does your ear say, I'm listening? Your ear doesn't say that. Who says I'm listening? The ahamkara. The ear just simply receives sounds. It receives sounds whether it wants it or not. The eyes just simply see sight. The eyes don't go, oh, I'm seeing. It doesn't do that. The ahamkara says, I am seeing. Now, what is this ahamkara? As I said before, every human experience consists of 2 realities, the higher and the lower. The lower is the reflecting medium, but also the reflection. Now, I want to go back to the reflection teaching. Okay, we have a common example in Vedanta. And Okay, imagine a pot. And in the pot, there is a potato, and you're a potato. And it's filled with water. And that pot is on a grill. And that underneath the grill is the fire. And that fire is burning. Heat is being transferred through the grill, through the pot, through the water, and it's being received by you, the potato. Now, you, the potato, says, suppose it's an ignorant potato, says, you know, this warmness belongs to me. Does it really belong to you? That's called an ignorant potato. The intelligent potato, the wise potato says, you know, despite me being warm, despite me being conscious as a conscious potato in this vast water, you know, in this water, the Maya, because the whole Maya is pervaded by one consciousness, just like the entire pot of water, the entire pot of creation is pervaded by consciousness, pervaded by the heat in reference to the example I'm saying. The wise pot says, this heat does not belong to me, the potato. This heat is only borrowed. It is, quote, reflected. Where does the heat belong to? Does it belong to the water? Does it belong to Maya? No. Does it belong to the grill? No. Does it belong to the fire? Yes. In other words, the heat in reference to the fire is intrinsic. The heat in reference to the potato is borrowed. Now, this borrowing is what we call reflected awareness. Now, what happens is, now suppose an ignorant potato comes to wise potato and says, hey, who am I? The wise potato says, this warmth that you're feeling, this warmth that you're inherently warm, that does not belong to you. That is what we call Brahman. That is what we call the universal consciousness that is in and through all potatoes. And you go, okay, so I understand. So this worm is not now me, the individual. It is actually the human collective consciousness that is pervading all potatoes. Another example is we have, suppose, a mirror. And the mirror is there before dawn. So now it's dark, right? There's no light. And now the sun obviously, quote, rise. It doesn't rise, the sun, just the earth turns. But, we're looking, so the sun rises. And now the ignorant mirror says, oh, wow, I am now starting to reflect the light. So before it was dead, right? It was not reflecting anything. But now, as soon as that light starts to shine, the mirror, the ignorant mirror says, this light belongs to whom? Me. In other words, the reflected light, this ignorant mirror now thinks it belongs to itself. Whereas the wise mirror says, this light, this reflection does not belong to me, the mirror, it belongs to me, the sun. In other words, the wise mirror knows two things. I'm other than the reflecting medium. I'm other than the reflection. Just like a jiva, a wise jiva knows, I'm other than the reflecting medium, the body, mind, intellect, and I'm other than the reflection. Now, another point I want to make about this is there's actually no difference between the reflection and the original, is there? In fact, we already said some sessions ago, there is always a mixture of original consciousness and your body, mind, intellect of your experience. You cannot experience original consciousness because we said original consciousness cannot be objectified. Brahman cannot be objectified. But we can know ourselves as Brahman. How? I am conscious. Now, when you say I'm conscious, that it involves a mixture of original consciousness and reflective consciousness. But I just said, reflective consciousness is not different from the original consciousness. They're one and the same. So in other words, as long as there's the body, mind, intellect, this consciousness, I'm conscious, it is not original. It is called a reflection. But that reflection is not different from the original. So in short, what is reflective consciousness? Original mixed with the antakarana. That is it, mixed with the body, mind, intellect.
So Sattva Guna dominance leads to less of action or inaction?
No, it leads to the right action, dharmic action, because see, as long as this intellect is covered, right, then the intellect is unable to discern what is right and wrong. It is one big blur. For example, if a person drinks alcohol, what does that do? Tamaguna. It blurs right and wrong. And so one becomes careless. Why? Because the intellect has been tamagunanized. It's being covered by darkness. And thus it's unable to ascertain how is this going to lead into a consequence. Is the consequence going to be pleasant or unpleasant? Because the intellect is simply not available. So any kind of error, any kind of violence, any kind of unspeakable acts of immorality, all of that is a result of the intellect being covered. That means Tamaguna is present.
Tamas guna dominance again leads to less of action or inaction.
Tamaguna dominance, if it's followed by Rajaguna immediately, then it's going to lead into violence because Sattvaguna is last. So suppose it is TRS, right? Suppose this is reversed, TRS. First, foremost, Tamaguna, next Rajaguna, next Sattvaguna. That is going to lead into an example of violence because there's no Sattvaguna backing up that sense of inactivity, inertia. We got two kinds of people. We got the inertia people who are saying, no, I'm trying to discover meaning in life. I don't want to do anything. I feel stuck. Now, there's still some thinking there, isn't it? But there's also Tamaguna individuals who don't want to do anything other than just get their way. In other words, the intellect is last. Why is it last? Because Sattvaguna is least. In other words, it is not cultivated. Because of substances, you got tamasic foods, don't you? We talk about that in yoga a lot. Give me some tamasic foods. I think it's garlic. I think it's
Onion.
Onion. What about chili? Is that rajasic?
Rajasic. Chili is rajasic.
Right.
And garlic are tamasic.
Right.
And onion has also got a bit of rajasic.
Right. Okay. So Ayurveda is basically this entire art form of which foods are good for you, which foods produce, a clear mind. Now, let's get into a little bit of vegetarianism. See, the whole point of vegetarianism is there's so many theories behind it, but one of them is, it doesn't matter what you eat. It's not like now, eat meat, which is Tamaguna basically, because it is the grossest of the 5 elements, right? It's going to now cover your intellect. Do you experience that for those who have eaten meat? Like I certainly haven't, a long time ago. Okay, someone's going to shake their head. Okay, it probably does make some effect, but it's not going to have such an effect that it's going to completely dumb down the person. We've got scientists who are eating meat. We've got the top, NASA research scientists who are loving meat, right? So, when it comes to this whole food thing, basically the idea is keep your mind sharp. If food for you does that, that's great. If music does that, that's also great. If community does that, sharing like mastermind groups, that is also great. It doesn't matter what it is. So there's no strict rules, and I don't know why people impose them, but it's really not like that. Everyone's different. I know one Swamini some years ago when I met her at a Kriya Yoga in New Zealand. I was shocked, you eat meat? She says, yes, because I was a vegetarian for such a long time. And in my 40s, she said, I started developing some serious mental condition, not mental, but physical conditions of undeveloped, I think bone marrow is some problems. And she had to reverse back to meat. And I was like, okay, this is the first time I heard this. And so, again, it's very individual, right? It's not like do or die. Yes, there is the aspect of admiring life, honoring life, right? Not killing any life forms. There is the aspect of using that as a sadhana, but at the end of the day, you're just feeding the physical body. It doesn't really affect your intellect.
You're right.
My question was, if I'm inactive at any given point of time, how do I identify is it the tamas which is causing my inaction, or is it the sattva?
Yeah, it cannot be
established in sattva or I'm established in tamas.
Yeah, okay, good, easy. So if there is inactivity and nothing is ensuing out of that, there's no follow-up action, that is tamaguna right there. It's just clouding, because isn't it true that when you are creative and clear, this question doesn't come up. It doesn't come up, what should I do next? You're just in the flow. You're loving whatever is being done. So tamaguna every time is that force or energy that makes us just stuck. I don't know where to go, right? I don't want to move because we're in doubtful mode. There's no mechanism to back up any kind of decision. It's just suppressed. And now the question is, oh, that's interesting. So then how do you get rid of it? Well, we have tried, haven't we? Sometimes we even take a walk and a walk can help. We take some food, maybe a chocolate or something, but does it really help? Maybe a little bit, but it never helps completely. It never really gets rid of it completely. That's why I said on the beginning, it's not really about management, even though, yes, it is important to manage, but also about accepting. This is how the world is. You got Kali Yuga also. That affects the guna composition, right? In a Kali Yuga, whereby, you know, more Raja Guna than before, than the Satya Guna or Dvapara Yuga or Treta Yuga. We've got the nation, the culture, also affects what gunas we have.
Okay, so essentially Sattva Guna means clarity and Tamas means confusion.
Yeah, Tamas means total confusion and negligence and making mistakes. Remember Mahabharata, that story of Pandu, when he shot the arrow and he accidentally killed the sage and his wife? That is an example of Tamaguna. Did he have control over that? No, that's what we mean. Right. So these three gunas are always operational. They're active. They're controlling the way we think, the way we feel, whether we like it or not. In other words, they make us feel and act without asking for our permission. They don't knock on our door and say, hey, can I make you feel miserable or happy? Whether we say yes or no, they still act according to the dominant nature that is present right now. Rani wanted to say.
Yeah, there's two things I want to actually touch on. One is about the Ayurveda you were talking about. I mean, I went through Ayurveda for 2 years, treatment based, and my Ayurvedic she's Indian and is pure vegetarian type of treatment, but she actually suggested that I need to drink beef bone stock, and I told her no way, I'm going to do that. Even if my condition got worse, it's okay. She said apparently in the bone there is a special thing that actually cures and treats this condition. So I said, no, I'm not going to do that. So until today, I haven't touched any beef bone stock because I don't eat beef anyway. Yeah, so you're right. I mean, like there is certain things that you have to add meat into it, no matter how vegetarian you are. It's something to cure you or treat you in certain conditions.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to touch was about the Tamas Guna. Going back to people who are very, say, 80% sattvic or 90% sattvic, they still experience tamas during deep sleep, isn't it? It goes into a tamas.
Yeah, exactly. So the darkness that you feel in deep sleep, that is literally dominance of Tamaguna, because the whole mind is covered. It's enveloped by Tamaguna. So there's nothing to know because it's like a wall. You know, it's completely absorbed. That's why I say, I think I mentioned this earlier. That's why I say deep sleep and death, there's no similarity. Because death is, you know, freedom from, at least from a jnani standpoint, videha mukti is, Gayatri has a hand, is freedom of the three gunas. So there's no darkness. In fact, remember in chapter 11, when Krishna gives the vision to Arjuna, and he shows himself as 1,000 suns, right? The beauty of 1,000 suns. Imagine, you can't even look at a sun like in the daylight. Imagine 1,000 suns. That is you, your nature. It's a beautiful depiction, really, how bright and expansive and limitless you are. There's no question of darkness in death.
I'm just trying to make sense of this whole thing in the sense that when you say that people are reflecting different gunas at different parts of their life or different stages, is there a correlation within your age, you know, when you're aging? Because the teenagers are known to have the highest tamas guna. That's when they sleep the most, that's when they're the laziest, that's when inaction is the highest, and this is proven by research.
Indeed.
But then you obviously get over it when you come into your emerging adulthood, which is 18 to 25 years old.
Good.
Before you get into your next stage of life. So how much of it is your vasanas and how much of it is actually the practical, physical?
Yeah, this is a great point. So in the scriptures, it said that in the first 2 years, a baby is basically Tamaguna. Now, if you look into a baby's eyes, why are they shining? You know, they say that looking into the eyes, actually looking into the mind. I know they say into the soul, but the soul just means the antakarana, the subtle body. So the baby doesn't have its intellect, its mind is not yet sophisticated enough to receive the outpouring of these vasanas. That's why you're looking just a pure mind. And it's beautiful to see, isn't it? It's just like so shining. And then as we get old, you'll notice how, you know, the eyes start to show some signs and we start to show some less cuteness and all of that because these gunas are starting to come in. Now, yes, absolutely. So first 2 years, just a little order, is Tamaguna. Why? Because we can observe this: sleep and eat. That is basically the attributes of Tamaguna, the material. In other words, I'm just preserving my body. Now, as the person starts to age and these vasanas are now allowed to modify the thought, the vrittis of the mind, because the mind is now sophisticated enough to receive the input of these samskaras or the vasanas. And thus the baby starts to exude different traits. Now you say, well, you know, what determines that? Well, samskaras, they also come from the past life. In other words, they're already predetermined. In other words, your child, right, it may all start sparkling. In fact, they all start sparkling because they're just a fresh, clean slate. But as they grow up slowly, then this like a queue, like literally a queue waiting, that is what you see, right? That is what modifies your child. That is what you see. One day they're really kind of, you know, spoiled, which is Rajaguna in that moment. Next day they're a little bit, you know, kind of loving and want to hug you and so on. That is Sattva-guna in that moment. So again, what's happening is through the ages, through our life, our prarabdha karma is just going to keep on flowing. And we don't really control that because that is already on the basis, that's just an effect of our past causes. So that prarabdha karma makes us suddenly wake up feeling like lousy, right? It's like, why? Yesterday I had a wonderful day. Today it's not so much wonderful. Or today there's just clarity. You know, those moments we just wake up, there's total clarity. It's like, wow, this is amazing. And it's not coffee. It's not tea. You didn't do anything. It's the same environment. Same people are there. And yet there's just this outpouring of epiphanies, insights, lucidity, getting it. So what happens is sometimes we get attached to that. We think, that's liberation. No, that is the three gunas working endlessly. A person that is not in spirituality also has those incredible moments, but they don't make a story about it. They don't say, oh, you know, I'm just enlightened. So 2 points. Number one, get attached not to these beautiful states that you experience. You go into meditation, an effective meditation, for example, and then you feel amazing. You know, there's this glitter, right? Everything's like shining. That is Sattva-guna. And then there's times when things are just dark, right? This is darkness. That's Tamaguna there. And there's those times when you just want to, like, you feel bubbly, alive, dynamic, interesting, passionate, desirous, fun, right? You want to go out. Rajaguna is right there. So, yes, as we go through our times, our prarabdha karma keeps pouring. That prarabdha karma is made up of these three gunas, and that is what determines the kind of these gunas that we have. Now, remember, that is not the end, because the intellect can still make a decision. Whenever the intellect makes a decision, it actually cancels out the samskara, because the samskaras make the intellect think in a certain way. But the intellect can still say, no, I'm going to choose to do it differently. Now, yes, there is a strong urge to follow your samskara, isn't there? Because it's a habit. But you still have, with strong will, you can say no. So this is why people get confused. Where is this free will? In a sense, they're right, actually, but they're not completely right, because they're not addressing this. This is the mechanism that can intercept the samskara. If we didn't have this, then yes, there's no free will, because you just keep on receiving on the basis of your past actions. This is why we say, before you even decide, it's already been decided for you. Because what is it that decides? What is it that says, here's how I'm going to do it? Samskara. By the time it enters into a thought mode, from potential into thought, we go, here's a decision that I'm making. But it's not a decision that you made. That's just a repetitive impression that has been already done before. However, in that moment, you can say, let me look into this before I apply an action. Now, that interception is called free will.
I'll just take something I've heard before about tamas and rajas. If you had a lot of tamas, I was told, get active to bring yourself out of that. And if you're in rajasic, then calm down, you know, try and meditate.
Good.
That sort of thing.
Good.
But I guess there's nothing, you don't want to get out of sattva, so there's no instruction to go down. Maybe go to sleep, go to bed. Another thing I was wondering of, in this model, could it be seen as a line of tamas on the left and sattva on the right, and in the middle is rajas, and so that you need to go through them? I don't know if you can have a lot of sattva and a lot of tamas and no rajas or nearly none. Is that possible? I don't feel that would be right? Wouldn't that be more you're on one side or the other, or in the middle?
You're dominantly one throughout life. That's why I say there's, in school, there's the quieter kids, the smart kids, and there's the active kids, the sports people. They're usually the ones that get all the attraction, but there's the ones, the geeks and the smart ones. And there's ones who are just lazy, the ones that smoke pot, stone beings. What is that? Tamaguna, I'll get to that. All of them are operational at one moment or the other. That's the first teaching. There's never just one. The whole point of this is to cultivate more Sattva Guna, and we can even prove this. The Bhagavad Gita is divided into 3 sections. I'm also going to support what Gayatri said. Chapter 2 to 6 is Karma Yoga. What is Karma Yoga? It cultivates more Rajaguna because Krishna already knows. How do we start out life? Going back to Gayatri, Tamasic. For most of our lives, we're Tamasic. So what does it say? Don't go into Sattva. First, here's how to cultivate Rajaguna. So we prescribed Karma Yoga level 1. What is that? First, think about Ishvara when you receive the results of your selfish actions. We don't tell you, anything about your actions qualities. Do whatever you want, but think about God when you receive a result. That is the first step that you tell your child, because your child still kind of like wants to go out there and wants to do this and wants to do that. So, you don't have to like tell them major teachings. Just say, hey, think about this amazing intelligence that made it so that you received this kiss from your girlfriend or boyfriend, or you got this mark, a good mark on your report, or your teacher has applauded you, or your classmates have done this or done that. Think about this, what took place, the interconnectedness. So you kind of make them think about the connections that took place. That's Karma Yoga level 1. That already snaps them out of this tamasic, like lazy mode, not to think, not to participate, not to contribute. Then we have Karma Yoga level 2. This is where by now, you not only think about this intelligence, Ishvara, when you receive a result, but also while doing an action, in and through that, you think about how many forces are right now acting so that this action is actually possible. To talk, right? You need to breathe air. You need to, you're alive because the body, as a body, has eaten food. The internet's working. The electricity is now working. What builds electricity? What makes the electricity? What's the intelligence of our brain cells now that's causing us to remember and communicate? So many things are taking place right now. So teaching, I'm now thinking of Ishvara. You're listening, you're thinking of Ishvara. And then you receive a result, you think of Ishvara. That further cultivates our composition of increases Rajaguna. Now you eventually have to get out of that. In other words, eventually from Karma Yoga level 1 to Karma Yoga level 2, you have to change the quality of your actions. That's how the teaching takes place. So the only difference between 1 and 2 is 1, think about Ishvara while doing actions. Level 2, now you start to naturally, it's not like suddenly you get told, okay, now you've been doing Karma Yoga level 1 for 2 years, now I need to go into level 2. No, naturally you transition into Lord becomes more of a friend throughout your actions, because you've been thinking about him half the time. Now you're thinking about him most of the time, or her. And then we go to Upasana Yoga level 1. Upasana Yoga level 1 now cultivates more Sattva Guna. This is where you go from Raja Guna into Sattva Guna. What is level 1? It is whereby you go into Ishta Devata mode. You think about the personal God like Jesus or Buddha or Rama or Krishna and whoever it is that you relate to. And you think about them and you pray to them, because you're now learning to focus on one single individual. That requires stillness of thought. And that is Sattva Guna attribute. Upasana Yoga level 2 is you go into what we call Patanjali Yoga Sutra, 8 steps. In other words, you start to learn, the asanas. Now think about asanas. Why is asana so early on in Upasana Yoga level 2? Because the person, especially youngsters, are still rajasic. In other words, they're highly active, like youth. They want to just put their energy out there. Now we say, hey, we've got a perfect system for you. Instead of wasting it out there into meaningless, mindless things, here's how to channel it into something that is more creative, more divine, more in touch with the higher. And so we give you asana. And then we go into pratyahara, right into pranayama, into breathing. So it's still at the gross level. And then we go further into dharana, concentration. In other words, now you're learning to channel that mind that is scattered into one single point. And then we go to dhyana, meditation. That is whereby we retain that focus. In other words, we retain the sattva guna. In other words, upasana yoga level 1 equals focusing on your personal deity. Upasana yoga level 2, the person says, hey, I'm getting suspicious here. Why is God only in Krishna? Why can he not be inside the clouds or on the sun, or as the sun, or as the light, or as the air that I breathe? Now the vision expands and everything is God. So that prepares you for the last stage, jnana yoga. Jnana yoga needs a lot of sattva guna in order to discern the subtlest of the subtlest and the reality as we are experiencing. Therefore, there's a beautiful order that the Bhagavad Gita structure itself reveals how to go about the transition in our lives. Topic 1, definition of the three gunas. I think we have covered that. We'll cover more. Topic 2 is how the three gunas bind. This is verse 6 to 9. So let's read verse 6. Sattva guna is pure, free of pain, binds via subtle form of pleasures and knowledge. Okay, so whoever likes to play with information, to research, to look into things, to learn languages, to learn Vedanta. I'm studying Vedanta. I don't know how you can study Vedanta. It's not meant to be a study. It's meant to be a discovery of how things work. Let's not turn it into another academic pursuit. I've got a certificate studying Vedanta for 3 years. So what are the qualities of Sattva Guna dominance? I'll just take you through a quick list. The first one is important clarity of thinking. This is what we all appreciate. So clarity of thinking has nothing to do with an enlightened person. It just has to do with a sattvic mind. That is it. And what happens then? Then it just becomes a pure reflector of awareness. That's why it's so much easier to ascertain this knowledge of the self when the mind is sattvic. I know some people who are highly intelligent and smart and sattvic and calm. They go into Vedanta class, they get this within weeks. Others who are more lazy, more active, they come straight from asanas, from yoga, Sto Raja Guna. Hey, it's a boring pursuit. It becomes a boring. It's like, give me some action. What is this knowledge stuff? Give me, it's all in the action. And I also relate to this myself because I was in some years myself into yoga. And one of my best friends was a purely Sattva Guna oriented person. And I always used to put down his knowledge. I thought, what is this knowledge? You need to meditate. You need to do Kriya Yoga. You need to move your Shakti up and down the spine. And then as the mind matures up, obviously now it starts to understand like, wow, so this was just a journey that one was being taken through. Whenever you're cheerful, happy, bubbly for no reason, not like you want $1 million, it doesn't matter. That's just the temporary subsiding of the desire. And therefore the mind gets to now reflect pure awareness, which is in a form of joy. I'm not talking about that. Just cheerful for no reason. That is Sattva Guna right there. A smart person, who we generally, inventors, Einstein, Thomas Edison, we've got Ramanujan, any inventor, a brilliant mind, they value calmness, tranquility, silence, very important for them. Sattva Guna also causes you to absorb very easy. So if you want to develop your memory, then change your lifestyle. Change a lifestyle that supports a quiet mind. Because how is a person supposed to register something long enough for that to turn into long-term memory when the mind is being occupied with the next thought? So in other words, it needs to stay for some time until it transfers into long-term memory. It also causes the person to remember easily because the mind is not disturbed by other thoughts of what I should do afterwards. What are you now thinking about me? Am I performing good? How am I doing? Should I do this? You're just with the moment. It also makes us contemplative. So thinkers, think of famous thinkers in our world who have brought inventions. You got, for example, Teflon, we've got microwave, we've got transistors, right? We've got the light bulb, we've got AC, DC. These inventions require the individual to tap into something much higher than just, the worldly stuff. Let's kind of do what I've done before. You need to think like an extra level up. that requires Sattva Guna. It also makes the person artistic. So entertainers who are improvising art, you know, something that requires newness, right? Bring some newness, invigorate it with some life. Then we bring a sattvic mind in. What happens when such a mind gets polluted? Because it's such a huge contrast between a tranquil mind and a non-tranquil mind, the person immediately experiences agitation. So the moment that the Raja Guna comes, it's painful because the Sattva Guna is so pure. It's kind of like throwing a stone inside a pond. Even though the pond is so big, the ripples still spread out so wide. It is so noticeable. And so the Sattva Guna person is very sensitive to their mind. How does this Sattva Guna bind? Such a person is never satisfied with knowledge, no matter how much they get. It's not enough. I want more. In other words, they want to further research into their area. And because their whole, such a person's happiness depends on knowledge. They're entwined. This is called bound. I'm bound by the need to know, the need to understand, the need to be the best, the brightest, the one that can articulate, the one that can explain, the one that can be the number one in terms of intellectual, academic capacity. That is Sattva Guna talking right there. This ahamkara, when it's placed into this Sattva Guna, then this ahamkara wants to make itself bigger. How? More knowledge equals bigger I. Bigger I equals more knowledge. It's a direct correlation there. Verse also states that they chase for subtle pleasures. Now, what is not a subtle pleasure? Well, drugs, that is not a subtle pleasure. That is a very chemical based gross body pleasure, right? That cannot be a subtle pleasure. What is a subtle pleasure? The spiritual world is full of that. They get hooked on just feeling pure, like this cheerful, because Sattva Guna is such a cheerful energy. It's such a bright place that it's so easy to get addicted to that through meditation, through sadhanas. So the person will go to a boot camp, spiritual retreats, pilgrimages. Spirituality becomes an addiction, right? It's about preserving how I feel. No, it's about preserving a sattvic intellect. Now, what's the problem with this? Considering they want quietude and they want knowledge. Two problems. Number one, knowledge, relative speaking, is infinite, never satisfied. And two, always looking for seclusion. One little mistake, someone knocks on the door, already agitated. And that produces conflict already, relationship problems. So they depend on the external environment, but we don't have control of the external environment. You got a neighbor that uses a leaf blower every week, right? It's like, what are you going to do, right? I don't know why they made those leaf blowers so loud. Buy an electronic one or something.
Or even dogs barking.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Oh my gosh.
It's a constant struggle, right?
Yeah, it is. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, see, I'm not saying now, okay, so, you know, you're not supposed to care. Right? If you care, something's wrong with you, right? In other words, you can still buy maybe noise cancellation headphones. You can still put foam on your walls. Okay, maybe that's going too extreme. Okay, you can still make some measures. Today, we've got a lot of competition in terms of job and survival. So what does that do? It literally forces the society to be Raja Guna based. Vivekananda in about 1890 something, he said something about India. This is not the case anymore. He said, you know, India, he said this in 1890 something, India needs more Raja Guna, because back then you could see one Indian working. It's not like I was alive, I'm just using inference. One Indian was working and maybe fixing the pipe. And then you can have like 20 Indians just sitting down on the street and just watching him, like, wow, amazing, right? So this is all Tamaguna sitting down and watching one Raja Guna dominant person actually fixing something. Now, today, you go to Ramana Maharishi ashram, for example. I know my first teacher told because he was there in the 1940s, the Ramana Maharishi in Tirumavalai, and it was quiet. It was like peaceful there, right? It was all generally cultural and peaceful. You go nowadays to the same place, it's just like a bus station, people coming in and out, noisy. So the entire world is dominated, is controlled by these collective vasanas, because the collective samskara of vasanas is what we call Maya, the causal body of the universe. And we also share, as an individual, we find ourselves in that collective. So even if you have a predominant sattva guna, the time that you find yourself in is also going to add that dominance onto your individuality. And all of this we have to deal with. So this is why lifestyle is so important, which is obviously what we're going to get into eventually after verse 18, when we get into what is the solution to all of this? How do we manage this? The one simple solution is change your lifestyle, right? For example, some people choose to move away from the city because it's just hustle and bustle there. It's busy, it's active, more into the woody regions, usually synonymous with contemplative dispositions and walking and just enjoying the nature. Because think about it this way, and I'll close. It's very hard to contemplate on the big picture if you're looking outside a building and you see artificial windows and cars and metal. Because what does the brain have to do? It has to process all of that. It has to come back to the raw materials. Whereas if you find yourself in a pond or a river and trees around you, it's very easy, much easier to look at that water, one of the elements, to look at earth, one of the elements, to look at trees, the earth elements, and go, oh, okay, so this is almost just, this is called Pancha Mahabhuta, the 5 elements. Right before that, we've got the Sattva elements. And right before that, we've got Prakriti. So it's much easier to contemplate this and to come to appreciate the world if you're in that raw place, coming back to nature. So this is one of the things that we can do to help us to come back into this connection with the world, connection with ourselves. Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.